Good evening. COP29 in Azerbaijan might be over, but the work of the COP presidency is not. Turning the breakthroughs in Baku into credible solutions for COP30 in Brazil. Well, that means for diplomats and activists alike, there is little time to rest. I'm Shone, and joining me tonight to discuss the lessons learnt at COP29 is, as always, Orkan Amishov and Anastasia Lavrina. Welcome, as always, to you both. Well, one person with an intimate understanding of climate-related diplomacy is the COP29 lead negotiator, Yalchin Rafiyev. I spent time with Mr. Rafiyev earlier, and he offered his insights into what it was really like behind the scenes in Baku and the key areas of focus as the road to Brazil now begins. Thank you so much for joining us on AnewZ so soon after COP29. The event itself might be over. Diplomats, world leaders, even some journalists had a small chance to rest. But the work doesn't end, does it? The work, in fact, if anything, needs to now continue.
Yes. Thank you so much. Now our presidency has started. We have to look at the matter from two angles. One, from process-wise. We have just started our presidency. It means for the next 1 year period, we will work hard to continue our presidency, to come up with new ideas, to help the Brazilian presidency build their own outcomes, the package. Also, as part of Troika, we will need to work closely with UAE and Brazil, but also in terms of strategic importance for Azerbaijan. We need to maintain the legacy of Baku. We need to strengthen it. We need to promote it, because Baku was one of the historical COPs ever, because of its outcomes, because of the level of attendance, because of many important pledges and promises made by certain countries, and because of many innovations. And we need to keep in the next few years at least this legacy to be strengthened, maintained, and then further build upon it by having contributed to the global climate action, including the negotiations.
And the achievements were many and considerable. I think that's unarguable. The $300 billion climate finance deal that eventually got done. Carbon markets unlocked, something that has been discussed, debated, and been in something of a stalemate position for many years. Advances on gender equality, advances on transparency. Give me your sense of how you rank the importance of those achievements.
In fact, we have packaged them, the main outcomes, under the Baku Climate Unity Pact, or in other words, Baku Pact, with its acronym. The most important, of course, all very important outcomes coming from Baku, but those influential or consequential decisions, we consider NCQG, first of all, as the most important one. Article 6 decision was also a very remarkable one, as the parties have been negotiating it for the last 10 years. In the last 3 COPs, there were some attempts to get this decision adopted, but finally it was done here. We got it adopted. Also, some technology-related outcomes, including the one on Poznan strategic program. The gender action plan was very important outcome coming out of it, mitigation work program, global goal on adaptation. So on those outcomes, we consider they are the most important ones. But of course, there were some more, we call them sweeteners, that add some flavor to the whole package.
I'd really like to get a sense of what it was like behind the scenes. It must have been incredibly stressful, difficult at times, trying to get almost all of the countries in the world to agree and to do it with the clock ticking. Can you give us a sense, is it possible to describe what it was like behind the scenes?
Exactly, yes. We have, just for you to understand the whole landscape, we have come from 63 pages to 5 pages, and at the end on the new collective quantified goal. This is not only about the pages, this is narrowing down options. And can you imagine every time as you narrow down the options, you certainly harm the interests of some parties. You certainly have to favor some parties. And in this, in between of this, you need to make sure that everybody is equally happy or equally unhappy. And we have tried to make sure this balance is being maintained. Have been shuttling around all the parties, probably behind the scenes. When we talk about the behind the scenes activities, we should talk about our engagement with all negotiating groups, even at late hours, like 3 a.m., 4 a.m. We have been calling the groups, please come to meet with us. We have some new ideas. How do you consider this? Then have been testing some new ideas all around, and each time 17 groups have been called one by one to explain to them, try to get their agreement. If one of them is we're not happy to continue, then we have changed the overall course, and again 17 rounds. There were extremely huge pressure on us by some parties, even sometimes saying that if you don't get it, we will block it in other part. Sometimes we have been proposed some paragraphs that if you don't insert to the final outcome, we will withdraw our agreement on something. So the most important is that we endured this pressure. We didn't accept anything, and we stayed strong as a presidency, and we are loyal to the principles of multilateralism, the principles of equality and impartiality. We did not favor any party, and we did not put any party in a challenging position. Just tried to be an honest broker, brought together all the parties, bridged the gaps, and then finally got there.
Many people have been discussing and debating the influence of the Trump presidency in these negotiations. Do you have a view on that? Do you think that that played a factor in any way?
No, I don't think so. That was also my anticipation even before the elections. And once the election happened, in my interviews also I was telling to international media that we don't feel any impact of this development to the ongoing negotiations. The US delegation has been quite constructive, and they maintain this constructiveness even after the election. And I would say US delegation's role in this negotiation process, from the perspective of mobilizing developed countries to the right direction, was something need to be appreciated. So in fact, we haven't felt any negative consequences.
And those countries, those delegates that were not happy, as you say, in a situation like that, of course no one can be completely happy all of the time with every aspect. But those countries like India, like Bolivia, Cuba, others who expressed disapproval, what needs to be done now to bring them back into discussions over the next few months and years?
I think we need to distinguish the positions expressed. I mean, India and Bolivia are completely different positions. What India was saying, that India was, of course, trying to block the whole decision, but they came to us, asked for a floor in the statement, but didn't mention when, even if it is before the adoption or after. And we, after the adoption, we gave them a floor and they expressed their view. When it comes to Bolivia, Bolivia was not against the decision, was not blocking it, just expressed solidarity with India's those positions, that the figure is low, that the developed countries should do more, and Cuba as well. So their dissatisfaction was not about the decision, but about the approach by the developed countries. What I mean approach, I mean the figure that they expected more, and other elements. India's position was really, in comparison with others, harsher, but they have been included. I would not agree with the position that India expressed about the inclusivity, because India was part of all events that we have organized in Azerbaijan before the COP event, in the pre-COP, in the Shamakhur heads of delegations retreat, even during the COP, in all negotiating process. And I would tell it with all my responsibility that in all rooms when we discuss NCQG, India was there. So therefore, we cannot accept such a claim that India was saying that the process was not inclusive.
And turning to the European Union, we saw a very strong validation of the climate finance deal from the EU. Equally, though, on the other side, there was some controversy about the president of the EU not attending the event, some discussions around that. Can you give us your perspective on the role of the EU during the negotiations?
EU's position, the most important outcome expected from Baku was NCQG. And EU, as the biggest donor in the climate action, the global climate action, was expected to play the leadership role. We have, from the beginning of the process, we have been noticing that European Union wants to take part an active role. But I would say mainly this position was further intensified after the election at the US was known, because in that case, they were expecting to see the results of the US election and then to see whether they are sharing the burden or not. And then they have become more proactive. But sometimes the EU position during the negotiation process was deviated from the track that we have been all desiring for. Like the figure itself, of course, the 300 was something that all parties agreed. That was a consensual agreement that we ended up. But in fact, the approach itself to the matter, to NCQG, started with 250, then we have pressured from our side, developing countries have pressured from their side, then the figure was increased. It could have been even higher at the beginning. It means that was possible, but that was not happened. So therefore, we have the reason to say that in this case, if that was possible, why it didn't come before. So, but in terms of EU's engagement, I would appreciate the role of Hungarian presidency, very active role, very active engagement with the presidency, and also the chief negotiator of European Union personally himself, Jake Werksman, was quite active in the process, constructive. We had open dialogue with him, which I think was also instrumental at the end of the process.
The French president did not attend. How significant did that turn out to be?
We didn't feel any difference, or we didn't feel any impact of this to the negotiation process. And not only even France, but some other leaders who were not present in Baku did not anyhow affect the negotiating process. Because the expectations were so high, and the heads of delegations here in Baku were all committed to work on the paper. Leaders' absence in this case did not mean anything. So we have been working with heads of delegations who were here, and they have been instructed to go in a certain direction, and we have been working with them.
Turning now to the future, to the presidency, what would be your message now to all other countries as you embark on this work, as we move towards Brazil?
Of course, I would emphasize my message, but I think this is an institutional problem, a foundational problem that we cannot change. If I say, do not bring the geopolitical divides into the negotiation process. Because if you bring these geopolitical divides, you end up in a situation where, even though this is something that affects humanity, you cannot act impartially. Like those issues that you have been experiencing in other parts, in other areas of geopolitics, you have been observing also here. But you know that they have to be in the same position, that this is something affecting everybody, and this is something that they are both interested to get there. But those geopolitical divides did not allow them to come to an agreement earlier. At the end they came, but the process was very painful until that point.
And are you hopeful that we can, as a global community, get better at leaving aside the geopolitics?
There were some, probably you have seen the former UN officials publishing a letter that the process does not fit for purpose. And I have expressed my position on this also during the press conference, that this is the only process. And this process has delivered in reducing the global warming, in bringing finance, climate finance forward. And this cannot be replaced with any other process for the moment. So having a process, even it is effective or not, is not worse than having no process at all. So therefore, I think we should maintain it. We can work on maybe reforming it. We can work on strengthening it more, to make it more inclusive, to make it more fair. But I think if we put aside the geopolitical prejudgments, we can get more effective and more important outcomes.
Mr. Rafiyev, thank you very much for joining us on AnewZ.
Thanks a lot.
Anastasia Lavrina, your reaction to Mr. Rafiyev there?
Well, Guy, it was really interesting discussion, and I can highlight some very important moments which attracted my attention. As it was mentioned, Azerbaijan will continue being actively involved in the negotiations around the achieved results during COP29, being here with the participation of so many leaders from all around the globe in the format of Troika, together with Brazil and United Arab Emirates. This is very important to grab the experience and to share the experience using the achieved results with a new innovative approach to the climate action which we observe today. It was also highlighted that some member states tried to, let's say, affect the negotiation process. Even the pressure was mentioned there, but Azerbaijan tried to keep neutrality, making sure that the countries have enough willingness and a strong platform for meetings, negotiations, and to make sure that all arguments which is being delivered by the member states are heard and discussed at the panel discussions. I like the point about the U.S. presidency. If Donald Trump is taking his presidency since January, whether it's going to affect the climate negotiations. I really trying to follow this moment as a lot of participants during COP29 try to explain their fearness. If United States decide to withdraw from Paris Climate Agreement, how it may affect the achieved results. As we could hear from this interview, it seems that Azerbaijan doesn't feel any obstacles from this, especially because United States delegation was actively involved in all negotiations. For me, it's more even now relevant to consider the position of the European Union, whether the Union itself will be able to act from one single position, or we should expect more division among the member states. If it happens, it may bring some challenges for the future work of COP, even in Brazil. If they have one single approach, being consistent on what has already been achieved, then it will be easier for less developed and developing countries to feel the support from the global community, as we do remember how developing countries try to pursue developed countries to bring more money, if we say it openly. The countries need financial support to overlap all of those challenges they have for today. And the amount agreed at COP29 still can benefit the developing countries, but again, if there is the consistency from the developed nations to follow the achieved results, and all of those mentioned aspects from the fossil fuels, from the climate change policy of all member states, and at the same time whether they are willing to, let's say, increase the amount which was agreed in Baku. $300 billion, it's not the final. It's agreed, but the countries are also willing to work. They agreed to work for the future to increase the amount by 2035. If they can work in this direction, then the developing countries can feel their support and be ready for more discussion during COP30 and later in during others COP31, 32. events in other parts of the globe.
And looking to the future, Orkan Amashov, it was clear from listening to Mr. Rafiyev that the obvious point that the event may be over, but the presidency, of course, is not.
Absolutely. The event is over. Actually, when I was listening to Mr. Rafiyev, I thought about this construct. So COP29 presidency, when it comes to Azerbaijan's engagement with the wider world, it's not even the beginning of the end for Azerbaijan. It's not even the end of the beginning. It's perhaps the beginning itself in many ways, because apart from the legacy, Azerbaijan is now a big player, very consequential player on the world stage. Azerbaijan hosted one of the most successful COPs in the history of climate diplomacy. We understand that the decision on NCQG was very difficult to achieve, although Mr. Sultanov yesterday said that it was a question of timing, really. The consensus was emerging, but we needed to sort of utilize our resources in an effective manner and use our time effectively. I think what struck me about Mr. Rafiyev's answers, he wasn't looking for excuses. Because we understand that the pressure on COP29 presidency was absolutely massive. We understand that although he said that the absentees did not play an important role, but the feeling we had back when we were there, of course, that there was a sense of Western-engineered failure project. But of course, the fact that the environment ministers were there, and they were working very hard, flat out, around the clock, made absolutely certain that we achieved that fundamental success. COP29 presidency, I would look at it from two separate angles. One is that, of course, what has been achieved in Baku should be augmented. So earlier we talked about Simon Steele's statement that there's an insurance policy for humanity, but the insurance policy only works when that premiums are paid in full and on time. So Azerbaijan will be very, very clear on this subject. We achieved something, we have to make sure it is properly implemented. We remember that the Copenhagen Accords, they adopted back in 1929, and that was implemented in 2022 actually, 2 years after 2020, when it should have been actually implemented. And I think Azerbaijan will play an important role in climate finance dealings from now on, being one of those actors who will advocate for greater NCQG in the fullness of time. So at COP2030, COP31, when this NCQG theme will emerge, Azerbaijan will be one of the countries whose opinion will matter a great deal. And also what was achieved here back about Article 6, full operationalization of Article 6, and also loss and damage fund, all of these things should be implemented properly in 2025. So Azerbaijan, I imagine, will be active. And the second element, Azerbaijan's own green agenda. We know that Azerbaijan is determined to increase its renewable capacity to 30% by 2030, reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 40% by 2050. I imagine Azerbaijan will be even more ambitious in those departments as well. So that's my expectation when it comes to COP29 presidency. It's just a beginning, really. It's the beginning.
And what did you make of Mr. Rafiyev's description of what it was like behind the scenes? I mean, you and I had at least one night with no sleep, but many of that team had 2 or 3, extraordinary amount of work and effort that went into it. So he was quite revealing about what it took for the team to negotiate things behind the scenes.
One thing is very clear. They reacted very, very decisively. They most certainly had a plan B, plan C. They were expecting those negotiating tactics, delay tactics being utilized, of course. And the fact that European Union, although they played an important role, and largely constructive role, they also had their share in this belated revelation policy implemented by global North countries. It looks like that there was a plan B. I think that $1.3 trillion as a figure was considered as a general ambition from the very beginning, and there was a focus on a core finance goal from the very beginning, because we were under the impression there that it is the main drive is to achieve the $1.3 trillion. But that must have been a general ambition from the very beginning. I imagine had the EU and other actors revealed their package Tuesday or maybe Wednesday, not at the 11th hour, it would have been probably possible to achieve a greater figure, something around $400 billion US, I imagine. But it's not just about the figure, of course, it's about the concomitants. And I think that negotiations there were effectively contingent on two key pillars. One is the global North countries' commitment to finance goal, and also their expectation from global South countries in terms of their ambitious NDCs, national adaptation plans. And in the grand scheme of things, I think that COP29 presidency did rise to the occasion. And I still believe that, bearing in mind the timing, the calamity was still in the offing there. Although of course, AnewZ Sultanov yesterday mentioned that everything was moving in the right direction. I still think, imagine there was one moment, I think that was on the 23rd, of course, must have been the 23rd, it was the last day of COP. We had a problem with quorum. I mean, we needed to have at least 60 delegates attending. Imagine some European countries leaving their stage. Imagine German foreign minister leaving, Saudi Arabia not coming back to the negotiating table. What would have been the case now? I'm sure COP29 presidency, particularly after listening to this very inspiring speech, had plan D or plan E, but still, I think the element of danger should not be underestimated.
Yeah, quite so. And Anastasia, the climate finance deal obviously took the lion's share of attention, but there were other achievements too, weren't there? Gender equality, for example.
Yes, indeed. That was one of the key issues to be discussed, to be addressed by the participants. Gender Day, 21st of November, it was nominated, and the women from different countries had parallel events, discussions, plenary sessions, trying to pursue that global community that when we are talking about climate finance, it also covers the needs for the promotion of gender equality in different parts of the globe. It's not only about the developing countries, it's also about the developed nations when the women still feel the pressure or face the climate change outcomes which affect the work and life of women and girls. Therefore, they try to pursue that international community should pay more attention to the distribution of the financial to discuss more about financial issues, to distribute the finance to cover all the needs. First of all, what is needed? It was agreed that the information about necessity to work on this direction should be spread globally through different information sources, using media, social media platforms, and other possible ways to pursue the global community, that there is a real need to work on that. Second, it's about education, not only the promotion of the information, but also the education on how to work to overcome all of these challenges. This is about the capacity building programs, education, empowerment programs, and many other issues. And it's very important to recognize the importance of global communication and cooperation in this particular direction. If you are talking about the future of climate finance, then who should take the leading positions here? Whether it's all about men who should take the decision during the discussion process and the approval, or the women who are quite experienced about the problems they face should also be invited to the roundtable discussion and express their willingness. How do they want to see the future development, the global development? So all of these issues were raised at COP29, and as my colleague just mentioned, it was real historical COP in Azerbaijan. I can see that the participants from different countries, it doesn't matter whether the leaders of the countries are willing to cooperate, the participants themselves are willing to create the bridges. It's about the media partnering organizations. It's about the representatives of non-governmental organizations who found the possibilities for themselves here in Baku, in Azerbaijan, and who already can speak about the future expectations and intentions to continue the discussion at COP30 in Brazil. But it's not about meetings in Baku and the next meeting in Brasilia, or where it will take place. It's more about the relations they will sustain in between. And here again, we're coming back to COP29 presidency, whether they will be able to sustain the negotiations between the participants of COP29 and many others who are willing to join the process, to bring it in Brazil at COP30 and to sustain and promote later. So I can conclude that gender issues were raised at the highest level, and it got attention from global. And Azerbaijan as a country is a Muslim state, but a secular state, which has always tried to promote the gender issues, could play a real significant role this time as well.
Orkan Amishov, it's not just about the meetings, as Anastasia said there, it's also about that relationship between COP29 team and the COP30 team, isn't it? What do you expect to happen in terms of the two teams working together over the coming months?
There's already an element of cooperation between Brazil and Azerbaijan, because we have a troika system entailing UAE, Azerbaijan and Brazil, so the element of cooperation is there already. I think one lesson that we could learn from COP29 is that nothing is impossible. I mean, everything is possible, and of course this, as I said earlier, the diplomacy is art of the possible. I think the COP29 presidency's intervention made during that at 11th hour was a very clear example of that sort of thing. And of course, Brazil has time, of course, unlike Azerbaijan, because remember, Azerbaijan was announced, was elected as COP29 for COP29 presidency in December 2023. And effectively, in real terms, really, Baku had only 6-7 months to prepare properly for COP29. It was incredibly difficult to establish landing zones, but they were established. That's the reason why we had success on day one. And the success on day one was about adoption of Article 6.4 standards, which led effectively to the full operationalization of Article 6 on the last day. So Brazil has time. So what Azerbaijan can actually, in a way, Azerbaijan could contribute to Brazil's COP29 presidency in terms of course, advising about the time management, about establishing the landing those in an effective manner, because as Deputy Energy Minister, Chief Executive Officer of COP29, Mr. Sultanov said yesterday, COP is actually crescendo of year-long climate negotiations. So you need to prepare for the process properly. It's not just happening within those 12 days, 13 days. So there must be very, very intensified close cooperation between Azerbaijan and Brazil. Azerbaijan could play its own role in terms of helping Brazil to establish landing zones, of course. So Baku breakthrough effectively should be augmented later next year. And this is effectively the most important factor I think we should bear in mind. I don't know at this juncture, to be honest with you, what will be the main focus of COP30, because for COP29, finance was a key element. We were talking about as an enabling COP, but I think even the term enabling does not do justice to COP29, because COP29, in terms of its gargantuan scope, was more than enabling. It was, and for that reason, I think that when it comes to entrenching, intensifying and reinforcing some of the agreements achieved here in Baku, there must be cooperation between COP29 presidency and COP2030 presidency. This is one element. And of course, along this way, we will go through this multilateral diplomacy and also try to work out a new construct for a better cooperation between global north and south, because what we saw at COP29, that those divisions remain, they will not fade away. But let's hope that at COP2030 there will be less geopolitics.
Anastasia, looking even further into the future, COP31, we've heard that the Australia-Pacific bid has now been deferred until June. Turkey also in the running. What do you make of those developments?
We can see that there are two parts which have to be kind of highlighted here. It's again about geopolitics, whether Turkey or Australia and the Pacific will decide to take place to host COP31. Already some countries, including the United States, Canada, and some member states of the European Union, expressed their willingness to see this COP31 to be held in Australia, for example. But at the same time, other participants, not officially, trying to pursue that if COP31 to be held in Turkey, it will bring more attention to the region between Europe and Asia and Middle East at the same time, which is also very important. Then some others are trying to bring the issue with the logistics. Which country will be able to we have more chances to be ready for hosting of COP31. Both sides have good experience in the past of holding universe global events, which brought many participants from many countries all around the globe. So it's not about even logisticals, but it's about the readiness of the countries to show their dedication to the green energy transition, to pursue it others, to make a decision where exactly COP31 to take place. I think that if we compare about energy dependency of both countries, it's quite clear that Australia and Turkey still rely on gas, on oil, and in a case with Australia, it's even coal, on how the economy of these countries depends on that. But both players are trying to show their intention to move in green energy transition. Therefore, I think what's very important for a global community to make this decision, to make sure that the countries have enough time to get ready for that. Azerbaijan, of course, using 6-7 months, were able to prepare all necessary infrastructure and be ready for hosting of COP29. But more time countries have for preparations, it's better for them to decide on which directions they can work all together to bring the global attention and to develop the agenda which will be promoted during COP29. So for me, it's better for the global community to understand and to make the decision rather than what decision will be in the end, how it will be.
And Orkan, Australia's quite an interesting country when it comes to energy transition, isn't it?
Indeed, yeah. Australia's case is very interesting and of some delicacy, really. I agree with Anastasia about the support that they will probably get from those 29 largely Western countries who will decide on who should host COP30, and the UK, United States, they are very, very supportive of Australia. And also, by the way, Australian Prime Minister was recently to Turkey, trying to persuade President Erdogan to withdraw from this bid process. So it looks like Australia is incredibly determined to host it. And also for them, it's a question of strategic vitality. It's a joint bid with Pacific countries, and they believe that they've got some moral authority, bearing in mind the scope of their bid and so forth. Yeah, Australia is very interesting because on one side, they're the third largest exporter of coal and gas, so their carbon footprint is big. Their NDCs are not very ambitious. Actually, in fact, unlike the UK, which I think back at COP29, Keir Starmer said that UK is determined to reduce its greenhouse gas emissions by 81%. There are certain people in the UK who are saying that there are budgetary constraints how the UK would be able to achieve this noble ambition. But Australia did not even utter any noble ambition. They are waiting for these federal elections. I think they will take place in June. But there's a second part of the story, of course. The southern part of Australia is rich with renewable sources. If memory serves me correctly, they're the largest exporter of green iron. So really, for them, this COP31, which will be in 2026, could be an opportune time to show their green credentials. I think they're more ambitious in terms of their rhetoric and desire than Turkey, and geopolitical landscape sort of favors them as well. But there are some moral questions about their bid as well, because after all, there was a huge criticism levied against Azerbaijan because Azerbaijan being fossil fuel exporter and producer, and the same argument in many ways could be levied against Australia as well.
Well, thank you both for your analysis as always. Well, that's all we have time for on this hour. Thank you very much for watching, and we wish you a pleasant evening ahead.